for us all as we pause to remember America's heroes, the men and women who gave their lives so that we could live in freedom and have the opportunity to gather here this morning. Today we are reminded that all gave some and some gave all. Throughout our history, the members of the armed forces have always answered the call when their country needed them. They put their lives on the line every day to defend our nation and to protect our freedoms. I would like to tell you the story this morning of just one American hero. Paul lived in Prescott, Arizona, and in November 1941, a month before Pearl Harbor, he drove to Phoenix to enlist in the Army Air Corps. He became a flight engineer on B-24s, flying many flights between Tulsa, Fort Worth, Denver, and San Diego. Finally being assigned to the 380th Bomb Group known as the Flying Circus, and eventually stationed to the Royal Air Force, the Australian Royal Air Force in Fenton, Australia. In 1921, on September 21st, 1943, Paul and his crew took off in their B-24 named Little Joe from Fenton, Australia. Paul was the engineer and the top turret gunner on this particular run. This particular run was a covert and unofficial run on some islands up north in the Kai Islands north of Australia. And for reasons that we haven't been told yet today, this flight, the crew did not wear their dog tags or any official American insignia on their uniforms. The bombing run was to Langor in the Kai Islands, and Paul and the enlisted crew on the flight that day had already had some bad premonitions about the outcome of the flight. A 9-plane squadron took off, and on Paul's particular plane, it was also the navigator's birthday. The bomb run was successful over the Langor Airdrome from 5,000 feet. As the Flying Circus was pulling away, they were engaged by 24 Japanese single-engine Zeros and twin-engine Nicks. Little Joe was hit early and hard in that air battle. Raked from below with cannon and machine gun fire, their number 4 engine burst into flames. The navigator was hit in the knee and the shoulder with small caliber gunfire. The number 4 engine propeller froze in place before they were able to feather it, causing a lot of drag on the airplane that day. I want to read a quote from the official narrative of the landing of that plane that day. As Paul looked from his perch into the cockpit, he could see both pilots standing hard on the left rudder, and the plane was still veering sharply off to the right. The number 1 engine was feathered in an attempt to prevent Little Joe from going into a flat spin. Smoke poured into the bomb bay from the right wing as the number 4 engine burned fiercely. It exploded with a loud bang, tearing off the leading edge of the wing from that outboard engine to the wingtip. Japanese fighters converged on the crippled ship as the pilot Morris and his co-pilot Bob Russell fought for control. With a bit of luck, they might be able to keep Little Joe airborne long enough to make it to the escape point. With 50 miles to go, the gunners did their best to hold the fighters at bay. Tail gunner Clayton Ruland flamed a Nick which crashed into the sea, and waist gunner Charlie Bowman added 2 zeros to their score. Paul warned the waist gunner to get out of the turret. As the pilot and co-pilot fought the plane down to the ground, they found a coral reef just off of an island that they could see was a shallow water, and they were able to crash land the plane onto that coral reef. As the plane landed, it broke up into several pieces, wings going one part, turrets going another direction. The front gunner segment was 40 yards away from the rest of the fuselage. The entire crew was unconscious for an unknown period of time. As the crew came about and regained their consciousness, Paul was tangled up with two other of his crew members in the turret, hanging from wiring and hydraulic lines and other apparatus that had them trapped in the plane. The navigator was stuck under the nose between the nose and the coral reef. Paul had a broken leg and a gaping wound on his right knee. Unfortunately, they were unable to free the man stuck under the turret, and he died there that day. They were captured shortly after that by some Japanese soldiers that were stationed on the island nearby. For the next 2 years, Paul and his crew endured incredible, unbelievable, torturous situations. They were moved several times from island to island, eventually ending up near Tokyo, Japan. For many months, Paul served in solitary confinement away from the rest of his 9 crew members that had survived the crash. Their daily meals consisted of a bowl of rice, seasoned with worms. And after the first couple of days of picking out the worms, they finally just gave up on that and ate the bowl of the rice, worms and all. When they got to Tokyo, they endured terrible interrogations and warned that if they lied to their interrogators that they would be killed. And several times during their interrogations, they were tricked into believing that some of their crew members had been killed for lying. What was incredible to them and unbelievable to them is some of the Japanese soldiers that were interrogating them spoke perfect English. And they had learned that one of them actually was a grad student at Princeton prior to the war. While Paul was a prisoner of war, to occupy his time and entertain the rest of the troops that were with him and the rest of the airmen and soldiers, he made a sundial and placed it in the ground. And because of his cleverness and his wit, he was able to convince his Japanese captors that he could read the sundial at night by matchlight. This story has been featured in 2 books, including Baba Black Sheep and Unbroken. Over the course of the next couple of years, while Paul was a POW in these horrible work camps and slave camps, several of his crew members and other men that he served with died because of the extremes of winter and the conditions and the lack of food and nourishment that they were exposed to. In August of 1945, World War II was over. His Japanese captors had been listening to a radio and heard that Japan had surrendered to the United States. The Japanese soldiers told the prisoners that the war was over, but they just left the prison camp. They didn't even release them from their cells. And so for the next 2 or 3 days, the American soldiers and airmen and Navy men were trying to find out how were they going to get out of this prison camp. And based on their ingenuity and cleverness, once again, they were able to escape and get on the railways to Tokyo and be rescued by the Americans coming in to Japan at that time. Paul weighed 98 pounds when he escaped. On their trip home, they were supposed to be able to fly home, but weather conditions prevented them from being able to fly home, so they had to go on a Navy ship, and their first stop was in the Philippines and then to San Francisco. Paul's first meal of freedom when he got on that Navy ship was a 1/4 pound of butter. And him and his buddies were so thankful to have something that actually had some real nourishment in it rather than a bowl of rice with worms. Paul's full name is Paul Dane Jones, my grandfather. He's a Purple Heart recipient, Air Medal Award, Good Conduct Medal, Air Defense Ribbon, and German Occupation Medal. He retired in 1962 from the U.S. Air Force as a Senior Master Sergeant, one of the youngest at that time to ever reach that rank. He lived to have 4 kids, 6 grandkids, and several great-grandkids. I don't even know how many times he was the commander of VFW Post 541 in Prescott, Arizona. To the day he died, he was a volunteer at the VA hospital, making sure that people that served with him and after him had the care that they deserved to have as our fighting heroes. And this is why Memorial Day is important to me. Because while my grandfather lived through World War II, and my father served during Vietnam, I get to celebrate Veterans Day with them. Today we honor Memorial Day for the friends of my grandfather and the millions others that haven't lived and survived war. Unfortunately, many of my grandfather's friends and more than 1 million American soldiers and sailors throughout our history have never made it home, but their spirit lives on today. Today we pause to remember those heroes and honor their selfless sacrifice through the past 238 years. They are the ragtag troops who fought the Revolutionary War for the right to chart our own course as Americans. They are the troops that fought to keep our nation united during the Civil War, sometimes fighting against their very own family. They are the young people from farms and small towns who went over there to Europe and Asia to fight imperialism in World War I. They're the great members of the greatest generation of World War II who, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, helped to defeat the Nazis and fascism around the world. They are the men and women, like my Uncle George, who fought communist expansion during the Korean War. They are the Americans who fought so bravely in Vietnam and never got the recognition that they so rightly deserved for answering their country's call. And for those of you that are Korean and Vietnam veterans today, to you, I say thank you. Most recently, they are the men and women who, after the tragic day on 9/11, fought in Iraq and Afghanistan to help defeat the terrorists and the enemies of freedom. Wherever and however they served, we honor each man and woman who lost their lives while serving our country. We must always remember that each one is a hero and each has a unique, just like Paul's, story to tell. They were all supposed to have full lives ahead of them, but they never got the chance to live them. They served because they felt our country was worth the sacrifice. Freedom was more than just a concept for them. It was something they had to fight for. And we give them thanks on days like today. We also comfort the families and the friends who wanted nothing more than to see their loved ones return from war. It is a price that they have paid in service to our nation, a price that we can never repay. And for that, we will always be grateful. Tragically, the number of Americans who attend Memorial Day events like today has dwindled in a lot of places around America. As the years pass, more people turn their attention to other things. For some, Memorial Day weekend is simply another opportunity for an extended vacation. If there is one thing that we can do to preserve the importance of Memorial Day, we should help young people learn the values and the traditions behind it. And that's why I'm thankful today for the junior ROTC that's here and all the other young folks that are out here today to take part in this celebration and understand what Memorial Day means. Let's give the JROTC a hand. Those of us that understand the significance of Memorial Day need to make sure that this day of remembrance is never forgotten. So I give thanks to the families of the fallen for being here to keep their memories of their loved ones alive. I thank the veterans who are here today to keep the stories of sacrifice alive. I also thank our brave soldiers and sailors who are currently fighting overseas today and pray for their safe return home. And I thank the many patriotic civilians with us to honor the memory of the fallen. And thanks especially for those that volunteered today or on Friday to put up the flags to honor this cemetery as we remember the fallen that are here. Your presence keeps our nation strong. It is your patriotism that will ensure that future generations will hear the sacrifices of those that came before them. Let us also remember the prisoners of war and those missing in action. And this is particularly important to me because, like I started with Paul's story at the beginning, he was on a covert mission. It took the U.S. government almost 20 years to recognize him and his crew as POW MIA before they retired from their service to the military. At the state capitol in Sacramento, we fly the POW MIA flag every day to remember those who never came home to the recognition they deserve. As we have this ceremony today, let us each make our own resolution that we will remember them for as long as we live. And I just want to close with this. I've done a lot of research, and fortunately for me, there's a lot of research available into my grandfather's service in World War II. If you have loved ones that have served in the military or are serving in the military, sometimes it's hard for them to share their stories. My dad was 35 years old before my dad was able to get my grandfather to share his experiences from the war. For 35 years, my father and grandfather's relationship was very strained because of my grandfather's service in the military. 3 generations later, our family still feels the effects of war. And so for those of us that haven't had the opportunity to serve, let us do our very best to remember those that have. And let's do our very best when they have a difficult time sharing, that we do our research and learn about their lives in the military, what they've accomplished and what they've done, so that we can share it with our children and our children's children. I am determined that my grandfather's memory will never die, because the sacrifices that he paid to keep America free are worth remembering. Thank you very much.